So thank you very much, colleagues at NORRAG, for asking me to be here with you this afternoon. It's a great honor. So what I'm going to do, and can we please start advancing the slides? So what I'm going to do in this talk is essentially put a position about how we might begin to think about decolonization and data, and how we come to confront and work with the traditions and practices which we currently have in relation to how we use data. Next slide, please. And the way in which I'm going to do the talk is essentially to take you through a number of moves. The first move I make is essentially to talk about what our ethical imperatives are in relation to working with knowledge systems and the data of these knowledge systems. I then move to talk about the dominant approaches to working with data that we currently have, and I make the argument in this explanation that there are normative ordering inclinations in these forms of dominance which come to configure and order us in very particular kinds of ways. I talk about this normative ordering as scientism, and I describe scientism briefly. I then move to talk about what the limits of these approaches are, and look under item number 6 there at what the effects of this of these knowledge orders and these knowledge systems are. I then begin to round off the talk by talking about transformational knowledge and the potentialities of transformational knowledge. And I close the talk with the outlines of what I would consider to be an alternative approach to dominant forms of working with knowledge as we are in our current situation. Thanks. Next slide. So, what are the ethical imperatives that we bring and take to the situation in which we find ourselves? So the first point to make here is that we live in an extremely complicated world. The world is a place of deep connections between ourselves, connections between the physical environment and the physical world, between us and the symbolic order in complicated kinds of ways. None of us is alone. The imperative ethically to come to an understanding of our position and our place in this world is that as individuals and as collectives, whatever we do has deep implications for the connected world in which we find ourselves, for this ecology. So ethically, what we're asking for is that we become a whole lot more conscious of how we live as individuals and how we live with others in and around the world in which we occupy. We need to become a whole lot more conscious of the well-being of the planet. Next slide. So I draw a great deal in my work here on the work of Catherine Adora Hoppers, a scholar from Uganda and with deep connections to the country from which I come, South Africa. And Catherine has taught us a great deal about knowledge systems, about how we work with the information of our knowledge systems and the implications of these knowledge systems for the kind of world in which we live at the moment. She says that as a people, we instinctively know that we are not complete as people without the other. In making that comment, she's saying is that the point that she's making is that no society is complete in itself. No society ought to cultivate the hubris, the conceit, that it by itself is able to fulfill all of its needs and its requirements. Instead, an awareness of the other around us, people who are other, people who are different. An awareness of other, she argues, opens us, it enlarges us. So without the awareness of this other, the self, she argues, is incomplete and even vulnerable. Next slide. I draw also on the work of Shiv Vishwanathan, a scholar ecologist from India, who's worked with Catherine and myself. I work very closely with Catherine, who's worked with Catherine and myself on several occasions, been to the forums which we have organized, and helped us a great deal. And he is a scholar of indigenous knowledges. And so what he says is that what is true of society is also true of knowledge. And the major point to be making there is that no knowledge system, no epistemology, no sensibility, however you want to come to understand and explain and describe knowing, no form of knowing is complete in itself. Furthermore, he argues no form of knowing, no knowledge system is complete without the dreams of the other. And so he urges upon us the necessity for hospitality, reciprocity, generosity, plurality. And he says, without these, no commons of knowledge is possible. What he's talking about here is moving towards a point where we live under this large umbrella of different forms of knowing, where these different forms of knowing are in a state of communion, of communication with one another, in hospitality, reciprocity, generosity, towards thinking of themselves as equal forms of knowing in a state of utter plurality. Next slide, please. So that was the ethical platform of which we step. We now start talking about dominance and coming to a sense of what dominance is. Now, of course, in explaining dominance, we can be taking many different approaches. We can come at how dominance in society works through exposing, through revealing, through surfacing the very many different facets of dominance. We are talking here about knowledge and understanding. So for our purposes, when we come to talk about dominance and understanding, we're talking about how meaning, making sense, in other words, is multiplied, how it is instantiated, how it is legitimated, and critically, how it is institutionalized. So we're talking about orders of insertion here into the way in which life comes to be understood. And so the key thing to be making about dominance is this capacity in the way in which it works. It is able to constantly renew itself, to put itself in front of us always as that which is perfectly natural. So it's important to say, of course, that the processes by which dominance comes to be institutionalized in our lives, in our different societies, is never singular. It's never the same. It's never going to be a mono processual process which we are having to come to understand and see in its different expression in many parts of the world. But different as it is, it has this inclination to present itself as being now the total package, the definitive package for how reason, for how sense-making, for how sensibility comes to operate. The critical point to be making here is that, of course, it isn't. It isn't total. It presents itself like that, but it isn't total. And that's a really important qualification to be making here as we move into the talk. Next slide, please. How this dominance comes to legitimate itself in and amongst us is by emphasizing that we come to this dominance freely. So freedom of choice is a major presumption, major precept, major point of departure about dominance. Dominance teaches us that we are here because we want to be here. And so it presents itself to us as a choice that we have made. In justifying that choice, it says we come to making this choice out of self-interest. We are all, it argues, ontologically driven by meeting our own interests, our own needs first. And so that freedom of choice is almost sacred in coming to understand dominance. But it also says that in coming to that point of expressing our self-interest, we do so on the basis of competition. We do so with a sense that we have to beat others. We have to be first. We have to enter the space of our choice with the understanding that there are others that we have to put behind us. And so those are three really critical precepts, premises of which dominance comes to function. And of course, it encompasses these premises by making the argument that this form of behavior is entirely rational, it's entirely reasonable. And so it presents to us the idea of us being in a marketplace, and the marketplace is an entirely rational phenomenon in the way in which the modern world works. Next slide, please. But it orders us, it presents us with a particular set of norms. I call the way in which these norms come to us as normative ordering. And this normative ordering, I make the big point, and it's a point that I come to repeatedly in this talk. It comes to this understanding of what this ordering in very instrumentalist kinds of ways. In other words, it presents this ordering as knowledge which flows, which proceeds in perfectly rational, reasonable, and logical kinds of ways. Now, coming to philosophically understand what this ordering is all about, it's important to understand it as being dependent on a linear and an ascendant understanding of how progress works. It thinks that progress is always going to proceed in an upward motion in a linear fashion. And that's what progress is. Progress is always in this logic ascendant. But what it does, and speaking critically now, it limits the capacity for alternative understandings which challenge the status quo of linearity and ascendance, which challenge the idea that progress only moves in one direction. Progress is logically only ordered in a particular kind of way. And so critically, we need to be coming to an understanding that knowledge works in extremely complicated kinds of ways. It's not only upward, it's backwards and forwards, it's moves laterally, horizontally, tangentially, and it is completely, in some ways, often not intelligible. But what this normative order comes to teach us is that we work on the basis of facts, and that facts as evidence allow us to proceed in this linear and ascendant way. Next slide, please. So this order is what we might call a normative value chain. Ethically, what this value chain tells us is that it is presenting to us a logic which stands above us, a logic which is able to be neutral in relation to the messiness of our own lives. But what we're beginning to argue here by way of critique is to say that this knowledge forgets that it's seated in a power nexus, and that knowledge and power in Foucauldian terms are absolutely inseparable. An important example, which I illustrate with in a lot of the work that I do, is my own country. So in my own country, and I'm now beginning to write the history of the development of science in South Africa over the last 150 years, the story of those last 150 years in South Africa is of a linear movement towards a better space. And so what this narrative, this linear narrative, is telling us is that we've moved a long way from this really primitive space from which we have come, and we are now in a much better, with this knowledge, with the science that we now have, we're in a much better space. My own organization, the Human Sciences Research Council, which I led for some years, was established on that particular basis. It was established on the basis that the logic behind its establishment was made on the basis of proper information. We now know, of course, that proper information was deeply ideological. It was deeply seated in power, and that what the organization in its founding was all about was using knowledge, was using science to back, to support, to prop up the vectors of power in South Africa. I describe that as Praetorian in the sense of being on guard. So it is knowledge which is on guard here, I said, of the power of the state. Next slide. So understanding how this knowledge works is really important. I make the argument that it configures us ontologically. By configuring, I'm talking about how it forms us into human figures. And once it's done with forming us, it constitutes us. It inserts in us particular ontological orientations, in other words, particular understandings of who we are. And it also provides us with the knowledge systems to hold up those ontologies of who we are. And so this normative order is constitutive. It comes to us with particular ordering rules. And what these ordering rules do for us is to place us into particular positions, particularly in institutions, in hierarchical kinds of ways. And once we are in those hierarchical positions, our behaviors are regulated in ways that are enormously deep. We are in some ways formed constitutively. And what this formation does is determine how we relate to each other in this hierarchical way, how we work with each other, and critically, how we come to understand these knowledge orders in which we find ourselves. And so we are in spaces where our very positions legitimate, if you like, the social order in which we come to find ourselves. The effect of this, and this is the last bullet point on this particular slide here, the effect of that is to delegitimate alternative ways of thinking, being, and doing. And so what dominance does is render, and I'll come back to this in a little while, is to render unthinkable, is to render almost impossible alternative ways of being, simply because they don't conform to the logic of what dominance is all about. Next slide. And so what I argue then is in play here is a form of knowing which I call scientism, where we are coming, and what this slide reflects is, of course, is obeying, is bowing down in front of the science. That is what this figure in this image is doing. He's bowing down in front of the power of what the science is all about. He's bowing down to empiricism, to facts, to positivism, to the idea that we are dealing here with something which is detached, which is neutral, which has no ideological interest in our well-being. It is science which is good simply because it is science. This is the in some ways the power of this analytic and deductive form of thinking, which is linear, which is hierarchical. Next slide, please. So we want to begin to make the argument here by exploring this criticism that the criticism that empiricism has blind spots. It is unable to understand its own positionality. It's unable to historicize itself. Its belief in its validity is self-fulfilling. It makes the argument that only that which can be measured is true and trustworthy. Geert Biesta, the philosopher, describes this empiricism as an instrumental way of approaching everyday life, of approaching value, of approaching meaning, of approaching how to make sense of what reality is for. But he asks, what is it effective for? What do we begin to understand by the value which it contributes. Next slide. And so in coming to be now advancing and explaining the critical position that we wish to take to dominance, we contend here that what this dominance has done, this way of understanding these knowledge forms, is to deepen inequality in the world today. The world is today as unequal as it has never been before. We have never before in history confronted and have had to deal with the levels of inequality that we see today. It is true that people are better off everywhere in the world, and that is a reality which we must acknowledge. It is also true that people are living longer, that the quality of people's lives is better, but people have never been as unequal as they are now. More critically, what this knowledge system has done is to precipitate this climate catastrophe to which we are counting down now, where we will be in 20 years, 25 years, in a situation where the world will be irredeemably damaged by this knowledge form, by this linearity, by this logic of upward ascendance only. It's now also produced with the emergence of these signs of this catastrophe, the murmurings, the stirrings of narrow nationalism almost everywhere in the world. The limits of the system are now beginning to manifest themselves with this inequality, with unemployment indices that we cannot control, with problems in society, with the delivery of services, the limiting of our capacity to offer welfare opportunities, services to people around us. And we've seen nationalist explanations come to blame democracy for the difficulties that we are seeing. We're seeing an increase of mistrust in public institutions, and in line with this ethos of this knowledge system in and amongst and in our heads, this idea that we can do things by ourselves, that it is in my interest to be now only looking out for how I am going to survive these difficulties that are pending and that are beginning to arise everywhere in the world. Next slide, please. And it's impacted deeply on the university as a form, as a way of managing this knowledge around the world. The university around the world has become almost indistinguishable in the different contexts in which it finds itself. The university in Kazakhstan is no different to the university in Liberia, is no different to the university in the United States. All of the universities almost everywhere are being recruited behind this dominant knowledge system. And it's being recruited in the form of the corporatized university, where this knowledge form is operating particularly around metricized accountability. So the important thing about the university in its ideal form is that the university in its ideal form is infinitely hospitable to different forms of knowing, to different knowledge forms. But what we're seeing here now is this reproduction of dominant knowledge. And this reproduction of dominant knowledge is being curated. It is being held in place by metricized accountability. And what is this metricized accountability? This metricized accountability is the requirement that each of us publishes in high status journals, in high status sites of dissemination. And what it has produced is a particular kind of impulse in all of us to simply run on this treadmill to reproduce what this accountability is all about. Bill Reddings says that excellence is an empty notion, that it refers to now nothing other than activity to take place. And this activity, he argues, is largely about the reproduction of this knowledge system, about this dominance, which we are trying to critique here. Next slide. And so this slide here is really important in the way in which it comes to configure and ontologically position all of us in the academy. This slide here is about H factors, and how H factors have come to, in a sense, steer our behavior in irredeemable kinds of ways. Everywhere around the world here, there is going to be a curiosity amongst our colleagues in the academy to locate themselves on the slide here. And there's a deep anxiety about not being on the left of this graph here. All of us want to be on the extreme right. All of us want to be in this metricized accountability, be saying that we are able to boast of having citation rates which give us these high impact factors. So this is a very important slide. It's a very important slide in demonstrating how this knowledge system of which all of us are a part now works in shaping the people that we are. Thank you. Next slide. And so what has the system done for us? It's by and large made each of us complicit in the system of dominance. It's by and large made us all reproducers and agents of this dominance. We legitimate this dominance by according its ordering power over each of us. But this dominance reveals about itself extreme anxieties and difficulties, and those anxieties in some ways inhibit us from entering the sphere of the metaphysical, the non-empirical, the mysterious. We refuse to work with feeling, with affect, pain, trauma, desire, joy. We have difficulty as academics in saying the word love. And I make the argument here that we are now confronted, many of us around the world, as impoverished selves. We operate as if we don't have histories which come before this dominance has landed upon us. Next slide. So we as individuals in the universities are all in some ways quite alienated. And what this alienation puts us and pushes us towards is a particular kinds of performance. We perform to meet the requirements of what this dominance is asking of us. So, of course, universities are always going to be configured in tension. We are always going to be aware of that ideal university, that university which is asking us to be curious, but we are being pulled towards this dominance, to this performative dominance, and we are being pulled to such an extent that the Portuguese scholar Maria da Pereira says to us that we are at the point now where we are afraid to be thinking about different possibilities. We are now talking about the alternative as being impossible. The alternative is an inconceivable path that we may be dismissing now in the ways in which we have come to be so alienated from ourselves. Thanks. Next slide. But the impossible is not impossible, because what continually happens around us and in the spaces that we as academics occupy is that the impossible comes to remind us repeatedly of its presence, of its potentiality, of its latency. And this has happened now again. It's happened with the arising of the decolonization movement. Now, what is this decolonization movement? This decolonization movement is an attempt to get us to come to understand the history of dominance, particularly the history of dominance in its configuration as modernity and with the logics of modernity. It's calling us to come to an awareness of how this modernity, how these logics, how these knowledge apparatuses come to configure, socialize, and finally curse us. And it is calling us to resistance. It's calling us to the ways in which, particularly in its European form, this dominance has come to claim for itself the status of being civilization's final signifier. But it is urging us to disrupt that claim. It's urging us to disrupt the claim, not on the basis of displacing Europe, not on the idea, not with the intention of negating the potentiality and the power of what our European inheritance gives to us, but to invite us, as Vishwanathan had asked us earlier, to stand in a space of possibility, of hospitality, to alternatives to our European inheritance. Next slide, please. But it's not only in the humanities and the social sciences where this disruption is taking place. This disruption is also taking place in what we might think of as the hard sciences, in quantum physics. So what quantum physics is doing now is taking us to a place where we are having to rethink the normative order of this knowledge system in which we find ourselves, where we are having to come to terms with the reality that there is no objective outside of us, that the outside is always in a relationship with us. And this is the complexity of quantum physics and quantum dynamics, which says to us that our very presence in relation to the objects that we are looking at affects those objects. And so where it is pushing us is to think in terms of complex probabilities as opposed to absolute certainty, which dominance is wanting us to conform to. And so Niels Bohr, the physicist, says to us, everything we call real is made up of things that cannot be regarded as real. So the moment is profound. And we are now having to bring together, if you like, hard science, the science of physics, and the science of the humanities, the science of the social sciences, to bring us to this incredible point. And it's beyond even decoloniality. We're in a space of meaning making now, which is so complicated, we don't yet have the words for it. And so we stand in total, in some senses, humility in relation to the complexity around us. Thank you. Next slide. And this is where now we are beginning to have to bring in these other knowledges. And indigenous knowledge is a really important, if you like, way of coming to temper the force that dominant science has come to play in the way in which we make sense of the realities in which we find ourselves. It's forcing us to rethink what Catherine Adora Hoppers calls the museumization of the other and the knowledges of the other, and to invite us to bring the knowledges of the other in this complex of both physics and the place that we find ourselves now in terms of decolonization, to begin to confront the complexity with much more open minds. Thank you. Next one. So what this new approach is asking us to do is to challenge strategically the rules of the game of dominant knowledge, to challenge the monocultural way in which we epistemologically have come to make sense of what the world is all about, and particularly to begin surfacing the rules of the knowledge forms of dominance, but also, I need to say, the rules of knowledge making of all knowledge forms. So what it is asking us to do is to be completely skeptical about all truth claims, irrespective of where they come from, to allow us to stand at this point where we are endlessly curious about how things work, endlessly curious about how our own lines of reasoning have unfolded, and to invite us to this point of radical openness. Thank you. Next slide. And so what transformational knowledge is asking us to do always is to reach out behind us, next to us, above us, to be coming to understand our connectedness and how our connectedness is absolutely critical for coming to a comprehension of what it is that we are confronted with, comprehending our place in our relationships in the wider republic of knowledge, and to always understand that our knowledges and our knowledge forms are provisional, are there to be helping us, are there to be asking us to open up the space in which we find ourselves for new questions, for new ways of understanding, and therefore coming to understand the public good in a much more common way, and not in a European way or an African way or a Chinese way or a Buddhist way or a Christian way, but in a way which is hospitable to the very and the multiple forms of reasoning which subsist and continue to exist around us. Next slide. So this is the last slide, and it's the slide which is about how we come to be constructing this environment, this ecology of hospitality and reciprocity, which we began to speak of in terms of our ethical approach to knowledge and to data and to different ways of understanding. And this ethical approach demands complete self-consciousness from all of us, a consciousness of our relationships with each other in their full complexity, for us never to be embarrassed to embrace the complexity of our lives, and to be wary of how we reductively simplify what are really demanding things which are happening in ourselves and are happening in amongst us, and bringing us to a sense of our citizenship of the world in very much more ecological terms, to push us towards thinking of our citizenship of not simply those limited sovereign geographical spaces in which we find ourselves, but to begin to think of our citizenship of the planet in ways that make clear to us our responsibilities to people far away from us and people whom we do not know. And so this planetary citizenship is an important objective of this alternative form of knowing. It is a form of knowing which invites in ways of understanding which are endlessly capacious. And how do we do that? We do that, and here I appeal to the work of Bonnie Honig. And what Bonnie Honig argues is that dominance has been able to build holding cultures for itself, which allow it to reproduce itself. She's asking that we now, in these alternatives, also begin to develop alternative holding cultures. And these alternative holding cultures are cultures where people who have a sense of alternative possibility to be talking with one another and arguing with one another, debating, critiquing, engaging in dialogue to establish the values of an alternative which is capacious, which is able to hold contradiction a lot more comfortably, which is able to work with not just linearity, but working sideways, backwards, round, in soft ways, sometimes in deeply critical and what might look like aggressive ways, but to begin to argue for a politics which is hospitable. And so we need to be talking about new forms of engagement here with one another. And when we think about our research, to think about what we are doing with our research, where to put our research, where to publish, how to publish, and to move away from that graph that I spoke to you about earlier, where citation rates are the dominant now formative device in our lives, but to come to deal with a world which is a whole lot more complex, is going to require us to begin new forms of measurement, new forms of assessing what is valuable, what is of worth, and new forms of coming to recognize excellence in and amongst us. And with that, I close. Thank you very much.